I call this meeting to order. This is the December 14th, 2022 regular meeting of the Schertz Planning and Zoning Commission. Item number 2 is seat an alternate. We have none this evening. Item number 3, hearing of residents. Anybody sign up, Tiffany? Nope. Any emails or? Nope.
No,
Nobody
sir.
wants to talk to us this, okay. Item number 4 is the consent agenda. We have 2 items on there this evening. Item 4A is the minutes for the November 16th, 2022 regular meeting. Item B is PLFP 2022-0202. Consider and act upon a request for approval of a final plat of the Crossline Module 3B Unit 1 subdivision, an approximately 35.79 acre tract of land generally located 1,750 feet from the intersection of Wersegein Road and FM 1518, City of Schertz, Bexar County, Texas. Commissioners, either of those need to be pulled for discussion? If not, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
A second.
I have a motion to approve from Commissioner Ray and a second from Commissioner Goldick. There's no discussion on the consent agenda. I'll call for the vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. 4 ayes, none opposed. That motion passes. Item 5, items for individual consideration. 5A is PLPP 2022-0199. Consider and act upon a request for approval of a preliminary plat of the Royal Manufacturing Phase 2 subdivision, an approximately 142-acre tract of land approximately 3,400 feet west of Door Lane at the terminus of Tejas Way, parcel ID 77739, City of Schertz, Comal County, Texas. Sam?
Evening, Commissioners. Okay, PLPP 2022-0199, the Royal Manufacturing Phase 2 Subdivision Preliminary Plat, Samuel Haas, Planner. Okay, here's an aerial map of the property. Outlined in green is the subject property here. We have the San Antonio ETJ to the west, Garden Ridge to the north. This is going along Tejas Way. This to the south is going to be the Enterprise Industrial Park. Property is currently zoned manufacturing light. That's our M1 district. The applicant is proposing to plat 4 industrial lots. It's going to be accessed primarily through Tejas Way. There will be a secondary point of access through an easement in the Phase 3 development, and that's going to come from Door through a separate lot that's neighboring. They have an agreement with them. Tejas Way was going to be extended into the property, and it's going to be have a cul-de-sac there. It is serviced by Schertz Sewer, Centerpoint, CPS, AT&T, and Spectrum. Currently, it is also serviced by Selma for water. However, it should be noted that there is a CCN swap currently underway, but as of right now, it is still serviced by Selma for water. The preliminary plat has been reviewed with no objections from the Engineering, Planning, Fire, and Public Works Department. Staff recommends approval of the Royal Manufacturing Phase 2 preliminary plat.
All right, thank you, Sam. Commissioners, questions, comments? The retired fire marshal is happy to hear about the second point of access. Oh, thank you. Whoever worked that, I really mean that. Thank you. All right, if nobody has anything, I'll accept a motion to either approve or deny PLPP 2022-0199.
I make a motion. Go ahead.
No, please.
Make a motion to approve PLPP 2022-0199 for approval.
I have a motion to approve.
I second the motion.
All right, a motion to approve from Commissioner Goldick, a second from Commissioner Hector. Any further discussion? Call for the vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. 4 ayes, no opposed. Motion passes. 5B, PLPP 2022-0197. Consider and act upon a request for approval of a preliminary plat of the Royal Manufacturing Phase 3 subdivision, an approximately 87-acre tract of land to the south of Tejas Way, approximately 750 feet west of Door Lane, also identified as parcel IDs 412335, 74404, 74490, 74458, City of Schertz, Comal County, Texas.
PLPP 2022-0197, Royal Manufacturing Phase 3 Subdivision, Preliminary Plat, Samuel Haas, Planner. So here's an aerial map of the subject property, which is outlined in green. It's right next door to the previous plat. Enterprise Park to the south. This one runs almost entirely along Tejas Way. Door Lane further to the east. The 87 acres is proposed to be platted into 2 industrial lots. It is currently zoned light manufacturing M1. It has access primarily through Tejas Way, and again, there will be that emergency access easement through the plat, and it runs on the northern end of the plat right there. It's going to run through the neighboring property. You can see the easement just right here, and it's going to go along Tejas Way there. It is serviced by Schertz Sewer and Water, CenterPoint, CPS, AT&T, and Spectrum. The preliminary plat has been reviewed with no objections from the Engineering, Planning, Fire, and Public Works Department. Therefore, staff recommends approval of Royal Manufacturing Phase 3 preliminary plat as presented.
All right, thank you, Sam. Commissioners? Nothing? All right. I'll look for a motion to approve or deny PLPP 2022-0197.
Motion to approve PLPP 2022-0197.
We have a motion to approve from Commissioner Ray and a second from Commissioner Goldick. Any further discussion? Call for the vote.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. 4 ayes, none opposed, that motion passes. 5C, PLPP 2022-0210, a waiver. Consider and act upon a request for approval of a waiver request in relation to improving roadways adjacent to the proposed Core 5 subdivision, an approximately 165-acre tract of land generally located at the northwest corner of the intersection of Scenic Lake Drive and IH-10, also identified as parcel ID 619013, 619006, 619017, City of Schertz, Bexar County, Texas. Sam?
PLPP 2022-0210, Core 5 Subdivision Waiver Request, Samuel Haas, Planner. Okay, here's the aerial map of the property, which is outlined in green. The shaded area in the kind of green color, that's going to be City of San Antonio. We have the San Antonio ETJ down here in the blue, and then we also have the Converse ETJ in the purple over here. We have Scenic Lake Drive, which is right here along the east. This is I-10 to the south, and we have 1604 over here to the west. So the applicant is requesting a waiver from two sections of the UDC, section 2114-1K, which states that the right-of-way dedication and construction costs shall be equal to 1/2 of the required minimum right-of-way and construction costs associated with the proposed street. And then also section 2114-1P of the UDC, which requires secondary rural arterials and commercial collectors to be constructed with 5-foot width sidewalks on one side and a 10-foot hike and bike trail on the other side of each street. So this exhibit is displaying the waiver request. We'll start with Scenic Lake Drive, which is right here to the east. The UDC requires that they construct a half portion of a total of 1,630 feet which would be, as you can see here, the green and the red combined. And what they are requesting is that they are proposing to construct only 720 feet, but a full street portion and not a half, as the UDC requires. And as we go over here to the proposed rural arterial, that's over here to the north, the UDC requires them to build 1,240 feet of a half portion, and they are requesting to propose to build 675 of a full street, along with a 1,000-foot connection to 1604 in the city of San Antonio. Based on the completeness of the proposed roadway sections at the intersection of I-10 and Scenic Lake, and section from the intersection of 1604 and the proposed secondary rural arterial, staff has determined that the request to not construct a portion of the roadway and sidewalk is reasonable and consistent with the complete streets goal on Scenic Lake Drive, as well as the proposed rural arterial. The full street sections as proposed provides a greater transportation benefit than the required half street sections. This waiver request was reviewed by Engineering, Planning, Fire, and Public Works, and staff recommends approval of the waiver request as presented. Are there any questions?
All right, thank you. Commissioners, questions or comments? What's the status of the 1,000 feet that goes through San Antonio?
I do not know that. I'll see if the applicant's here.
It's currently undeveloped. There is no roadway there.
Well, particularly what I'm looking for is your proposal is to, full width construction of that section in Schertz, and then the 1,000 feet. I guess that's to your advantage now to give you access to 1604. But I'm a little concerned about approving the waiver and then San Antonio saying, although I don't know why they would, it's on their, that's their plan, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah. I guess let me start. My name's Benjamin Ruby. I'm the project manager with Kinley Horn. I'm the engineer of record on this project. We have a major plat going in with the city of San Antonio. It was submitted last week, I believe. And that's where all of our public roadway plans with the full section for a secondary arterial will be reviewed and approved. We've already had preliminary meetings with them, and we have staff support. And it is on the major thoroughfare plan.
Okay, so this property adjacent to what we're seeing that's in San Antonio, that's also the same ownership?
No, sir. It's owned by a separate ownership, but they have a development agreement with that owner.
Okay.
That gives a full 90-foot right-of-way access, which will be dedicated as public right-of-way once the road is accepted.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of sidewalk waivers. And here recently I acquired a electric bicycle, so I'm out riding a little bit more. And but again, it's a trade-off. I guess I would much rather, particularly on Scenic Lake, since it, I'd much rather have that full roadway than anyway. Commissioners, anybody have anything else? Any questions, comments? All right.
I'm interested in the portion that's not going to be a full roadway. Is it just going to remain the same? And what's the benefit to?
So Scenic Lake Drive is currently a 50-foot right-of-way. It's a dirt road. We will have a taper. I think it's 150 feet. It meets all of the current TxDOT roadway standards on tapering that back down to the dirt road section. So we'll have our full 70-foot right-of-way, 3-lane divided roadway section for the commercial collector, and it will transition back to the dirt road.
So again, this more for staff. Trying to help out Commissioner Hector here. we used to require the half roadway, they would actually have to build half that roadway. So what you would end up with is, I guess, 35 feet of improved, and the other half would still be dirt or whatever it is out there. But, and then we went to roadway, because then we got into the whole rough proportionality thing, so they might not even have to build anything to begin with, depending on how the numbers worked out, right?
That's right. That's really the situation sort of that we're in. So again, we start with what does the subdivision ordinance require them to do? So again, it's where a road is adjacent, they basically have to get half width of that road or a minimum pavement width for emergency vehicle access. And so as you see, what that would get us is a portion of that extension of Ben Zingelman adjacent to the property, but you can't get to it in any way. So it doesn't help alleviate traffic. Which would mean everything essentially would be coming off Scenic Lake, and then all you would have with Scenic Lake is essentially half width of road. And one of the issues is the area where they're constructing the full width is because of where their drive approach into the project is. And so there are not a ton more people who are going to be going beyond that. Doesn't do a whole lot of good to have a half width of road that nobody's driving on. And so when we sat down and looked at the developer and said, where do we think the trips are coming from? What sort of makes sense on this deal? The answer was really to get more of the Ben Zingelman extension in. The only thing that really makes this one odd is that that's all not in the city of Schertz. If it were all in the city of Schertz, we'd go, great, we're building this full section here. It's a trade-off for what they're not building in Schertz. It's just not always that clean sometimes. In this case, it happens to be San Antonio. And even so, I think our attitude toward it is a couple things. One of which is we need to accommodate the traffic from this project, not overwhelm Scenic Lake. We have to consider sort of the rough proportionality implications and frankly kind of our core values of treat other people the way you want to be treated. And so we think getting that off-site section of Ben Zingelman through San Antonio has a lot of benefit for getting that extension to come in the future. So we will benefit for that. But again, as part of the fairness, we said rather than have these kind of half sections that don't really benefit anybody, we'll waive those. And so they're building more than they have to. The city will have to come back and pick it up at some point in the future. And if you're not really making any improvement to the road that's out there, it sort of doesn't make sense to do the sidewalk because it's going to get torn up when we come do the street anyway. And in this case, we don't anticipate having a whole lot of folks out there walking on it because it is pretty isolated right now. So I think when staff looked at it, worked with engineering, we felt like this is it's different, but it really does kind of come down to a win-win for everybody, because the last thing we wanted is that little piece of property in San Antonio never developing, and we've got this gap in the road as it continues on trying to get things through there. So that's how we looked at it.
Thank you.
And as Mr. James pointed out, then, the theory is sometime in the future, either another developer or eventually the city will come in and finish that. And I don't know what San Antonio's time frame is in terms of that. Is that Ben Zingelman? What is that extension that they're trying to put through there? But
Yeah, it's, on the San Antonio side, it's Ben Zingelman, yes.
I think this is certainly will assist in moving that project forward. And I don't know, is that, I was going to ask you whether or not, but I don't know, is there a road even there today? Is that Bainig Road, or is there even a road there?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, all righty. Anyone else? Roderick, did that help?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. And this is our approval or denial? This doesn't have to go to council? No? Okay. So if nobody has anything else, we'll look for a motion, either approve or deny.
I recommend approval of PLPP 2022-0210 waiver.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion to approve from Commissioner Hector and a second from Commissioner Ray. Any further discussion? Call for the vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. 4 ayes, none opposed, that motion passes. 5D, PLPP 2022-0210, consider and act upon a request for approval of a preliminary plat of the Core 5 subdivision, an approximately 165-acre tract of land generally located at the northwest corner of the intersection of Scenic Lake Drive and IH-10, also identified as parcel IDs 619013, 619006, 619017, City of Schertz, Bear County, Texas. Sam?
PLPP 2022-0210, Core 5 subdivision, preliminary plat, Samuel Haas, planner. Okay, so same aerial map here. Subject property is outlined in green. This is Scenic Lake to the east, I-10 to the south, 1604 over here to the west. So the 165 acres is currently zoned light industrial as well as general business. They are proposing to plat 6 lots, 5 buildable, and 1 open space. This exhibit here is to show you how the lots are kind of configured. The general business lot is going to be right here. This entire light blue section is general business. Everything else is M1. This is lot 900, proposed lot 900, and it's going to be open space, and the rest are going to be, these 4 lots are going to be industrial M1 lots. The access to this property is going to be through the proposed rural arterial, which is up here to the north, and then as well as Scenic Lake. The site is serviced by CPS, AT&T Spectrum, City of Schertz Sewer, with the San Antonio River Authority, and then the water service is done through the San Antonio Water Service, or SAWS. The preliminary plat has been reviewed with no objections from engineering, planning, fire, and public works. Staff recommends approval of the Core 5 preliminary plat as presented.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions or comments? If not, Victor, do you have something? No. No? Okay. We'll accept a motion to either approve or deny PLPP 2022-0210.
A motion to approve PLP 2022-0210.
Second. Sorry.
I have a motion to approve from Commissioner Ray and a second from Commissioner DeGoldick. Any further questions or comments? Call for the vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. 4 ayes, none opposed. That motion passes. All right, item 6 is a public hearing. I don't know, I'm trying to figure out how much, PLUDC 2022-0135, hold a public hearing, workshop, and discussion and possible action to make a recommendation on amendments of Part 3, Schertz Code of Ordinances, Unified Development Code, UDC, to Article 5, Section 21.5.11, specific use permit, Article 9, Section 21.9.7, landscaping, and Article 10, Section 21.10.4, schedule of off-street parking requirements. More paper.
Staff real quick here. I'll get started. Okay, so what we thought we would do tonight is cover really the landscaping section, which is kind of the biggest, most cumbersome one. And just to remind you where we are, the current landscape section that we've got It comes in terms of kind of total page count, if you will. The primary section is about 9 full pages, and then we have a different section, 2114.3. It's a little over a page long, so it's about 10 pages in total. One of the problems is that the requirements, when somebody is saying, what all do I have to do with landscape, they really need to know they need to look in 2 sections. So part of what we wanted to accomplish with this is make it a little more user-friendly on its face. And so what we did is we took the requirements from that second section, the additional design requirements, and the ones that are germane or related to the landscape. The idea was, let's incorporate that in the landscape section. The other thing that we wanted to do is we wanted to make it a little bit more user-friendly, because right now when you go through it, the requirements for a single-family residential house or a duplex are sort of interspersed with what's required for non-residential development, and that's a little bit confusing as well. And so we wanted to kind of accomplish that, clean it up a bit, but then the bigger kind of policy question was, are we okay with our standards? What do we want to do in terms of what do we want to require for people? And this kind of goes back to some of the conversations we've heard from City Council about wanting us to be a little bit more development friendly, not necessarily have so many requirements, not necessarily be so rigid with it, focus on a bit more what's really important to us. But I think the idea is that we want to maintain a bar that creates the kind of community that we want to be. And so we don't just want to do away with everything. We want to kind of focus on what's critical. And so we had gone through a series of drafts. You'll notice that what you got tonight was sort of a draft 4. And what we had done with draft 4, it's really kind of a combination of a couple of our other drafts with some good feedback from staff about stuff that made sense, didn't make sense, and then also some feedback that we got from council and a group of them that are kind of looking at some processes and some of the feedback that they had with it as well. And so what I'll do is really focus on number 4, but one of the big things where we saved a bunch of paper and we took out a bunch is our current landscape section has 5 pages that are essentially the approved plant list. It's basically you have to plant one of these. Now, what we tend to find with commercial is we have they hire a landscape architect who comes in for the most part of those, somebody who's gone to college for 4 years, maybe 5 years thrown in there, whose job is to design this thing out. And I think what we've kind of found is, do we really need to dictate you can only use from these, as opposed to somebody finds a different plant that they think is suitable, they think is appropriate for the area, and we let them sort of go with that. And I think that's a little bit of that shift in philosophy of, to what degree do we want to dictate this stuff, as opposed to we're going to show deference. So if it says you have to plant a tree, let them decide what tree they want to plant, as opposed to we're going to give you a list of which trees are allowed. You know, at some point, as new kind of hybrids are developed and things, we get plant species that aren't technically on here. You know, again, it's always fun when staff looks at this, you know, because if you look at it, what we've got is the common name, but then we've got the Latin name there as well. Always fun to make sure that those match up, and it's the scientific name, if you will. So an American elm being the Ulmus americana, and making sure we've got the right thing. But essentially the idea is, do we really feel like we need to regulate that? And you may say, well, I could see there being value, and there might be. But understand what that means is that staff has to go through and make sure that that plant is in fact on the list. Now I'd argue, I don't know, 75% of the time, you see the same kind of stuff that's used sort of over and over, but do we really care for that part that's not, that it's on the approved list or it's not on the approved list? Doesn't mean staff doesn't have any work to do, because again, if we've got a requirement for, you know, a shrub that'll get to a particular height, they may do a quick Google search to go, how big does this thing get, making sure it'll get to the right height or doesn't get too tall or whatnot. But that's one thing that we felt like we can streamline is, let's just take out that approved plant list and show deference to them as to what kind of plant they want to put for that circumstance. And so what that means is their landscape designer isn't having to go through that list to check it, staff isn't having to go through and check it, and it lets us focus on things that are a bit more important. So that's where you lose about 5 pages of the document is through that removal. The other thing that we've done, you'll see this on the front end, is we've separated the single-family and duplex requirements on the very first page. And so if you're building a single-family home and you're a home builder, staff can really easily point them to that. It's real easy to see what they have to do. Hopefully it avoids confusion or missing things. Now, we have made some adjustments there. And so a couple of things that we've made adjustments to is, one is currently the requirement says that for landscaped areas, they have to be prepared to achieve a soil depth of 6 inches. I think I've mentioned this before. We don't enforce that. I can't find a record that we have ever enforced that anywhere where the official's going out and measuring 6 inches. Now, what we talked about is if we're going to put it in the code, we're going to start enforcing it. What we've put in is 2 inches. So again, it's a reasonable enough standard. I still don't think our building inspectors or our planners are going to be going out there with a ruler and really getting down to fine. But what it lets us do is if they walk out on a site and it's clear that they've not brought in any topsoil, it's a whole bunch of rock, it's been packed down by trucks driving on it, they can pull the standard out and say, you got to bring in some soil, you got to get this to a reasonable level. And often we will see that where they bring in some. And so we're going to enforce it, not necessarily going to get there going, you're 1 3/4 versus 2, but it's a more reasonable standard. It's something that we can kind of go out and eyeball and say, yeah, does it look like it meets? And so that helps keep it alive. That's one change. The other change that we've done is we've gone back and we've changed the 3 trees that's currently required per residential lot, with 1 in the front and 1 in the back, to 2 trees. And so again, part of the issue there is when you consider how much front yard and how much backyard, is there really always room for 3 trees? Does the homeowner really want 3 trees? And do they really want to have a tree in their backyard? And again, talked about this, and sometimes what happens is the homeowner gets in about the 2nd month they've been living in the house, they go out back and go, yeah, I don't want this tree here. They rip it up and it's gone, and we don't do anything about it. And so again, I think as we talk about affordability and things like that, we talk about what's really important and what's impactful, how much deference we want to show. One of the recommendations is go from 3 trees to 2 trees. We don't care if you plant them in the front, don't care if you plant them in back, don't care if you do 1 in the front or back. To some degree, I think some of the view on this is shaped by the fact that when you go through some neighborhoods now, you literally have the same monotony of trees, the way they plant them on every single lot. And I think there's probably some value to saying if we reduce that a little, we give a little more flexibility, maybe people start planting them in a little different spots. And so that new subdivision that kind of has a very homogeneous look to it has a little bit of variation, at least where the trees are. And so again, not sure how big a deal that is with it, but that's where we ended up as the 2 changes to residential kind of coming forward. And again, I can keep talking, or I don't know if y'all want to comment or ask questions, or we get feedback from the public on the part we've covered, and then we'll kind of move into the commercial.
Just, there's something in the back of my little brain that it used to be, whether it was FHA or VA or, somebody used to require a tree in the front yard.
Yeah, that may be the case. And so again, this is part of where we sort of struggle on this. On the one hand, what we don't want to do is pass a regulation ourselves that we know is contradictory to something commonly required elsewhere. But the flip side of that is we can find ourselves down the road having a lot of problems as those regulations change. They don't require it anymore, and yet we've still, to match it, we have it. And to some degree, is it really our job to say, because somebody over here thought this was a requirement, that we need to enforce it? Or do we say, nope, that's on you. If you're getting a VH or FHA loan and they require a tree in the front yard, then just make sure you plant that tree in the front yard.
I meant that from the perspective that even if we didn't require a tree, they might end up having to put a tree in anyway.
That's right.
So, but once again, once you're in the house and you've made your first mortgage payment, then we'll come back to see if you kept that tree.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And again, I think this is, and you touched on something I should have mentioned, part of how we approach this is the minimum standard. This is the floor of what you have to do, and the assumption is that we'll have some people go above and beyond. That's certainly fine, that's great, but this is really the floor, and that's how we kind of look at it.
And from a personal perspective, I had, my builder was nice enough to plant two, I think they're sumac oaks, in our front yard. And those things are now probably 24 inches and, and they're 40 feet tall, and they're competing for space because there really wasn't room for two of those kind of trees out there. So, it may, leave it up to the landscape type people.
I think at my house now, I've got 11 trees in the front yard. I only have one now in the back, which is a little grapefruit tree because we lost one we had in the freeze. So again, the irony is I got a whole bunch in the front. Present, I don't have any in the back because we've had a couple die over the years, so.
Anyone else? Let me ask you, Rick, what's the game plan tonight? Ryan, are you going to
So
go
the game plan is really get feedback from you. I think a lot of this is sort of talking through. We're not necessarily, again, wanting you to.
Well, I mean, are we going to go through the others as well, or?
So my plan was to, so what we've kind of hit on that we've talked about is we talked about the SUP ordinance in particular, and what we've done there is we've eliminated the requirement for a full-blown site plan. What we added based on some feedback there is language that says, as part of what the P&Z Commission or Council can require, because you can impose conditions with that SUP, is you can have attached a site layout to it. So if you have a use come in that you say, hey, I'm not comfortable with being whatever, I want something, we've got a site layout. So it's not as much detail as a full-blown site plan, it's not as rigid. Our impression was the commission was comfortable with that, so we weren't necessarily going to talk with that. The landscape is sort of the biggest, most cumbersome, so we thought what we'd do is just hit on this one tonight, and then we'll come back next time. We can talk about some of the parking space size stuff, go over the residential stuff.
Okay.
So that was the idea, is just really hit landscape.
And once again, you don't want to break this up and send one piece to council while you work on the rest of it?
So we may, I think it helps us in terms of workload to send a batch through. So if we can get to the point of, in your next meeting, where we have that final version of, here's the SUP requirement, we'll show you the res stuff that we kind of came back with that we've talked about before, and then the landscape stuff, we'll kick that on, and then we'll probably hit parking.
Here's what I'm wrestling with right
Okay.
now. I can ask, and I think you'd probably have consensus that draft 4 is acceptable on landscape. But we come back in January, and now we have 2 or 3 other people up here.
Yeah.
So I don't want to keep revisiting this stuff. So,
Yeah. I'll show deference to the commission. I think my perspective would be, because we only have 4, I'd like to get a couple more on the commission okay with it, because what we don't want to do are impose these changes, and then as we have things come forward, we didn't necessarily have the full-blown buy-in with it. And so maybe let me offer this up. If y'all are comfortable with the landscape section, then what I'll do is, probably early next week, I'll send out the ones that we think we're clean on to all the commissioners, let them review and approve it, ask them to contact me if they've got issues with it, and then we'll kind of go from there. And maybe that's a way to balance that to move it along more quickly.
All
I
right,
think if it was important, they'd be sitting here.
It might be.
So if we make the decision tonight, I don't think there should be any more discussion on it.
I'll defer to y'all on that if that's how you want to go.
I don't disagree with that, but I do have a question.
Okay.
Just looking historically, how did the list come about in the first place, right? There had to be some reason for it.
So I believe the list came about because we hired a consultant 12, 15 years ago to come in and do an update of our UDC. One of these firms from one of the big cities of Austin or Dallas or wherever it was, the Metroplex area, yeah. And they came in, and it's fairly common practice, or was fairly common practice, that you have these approved plant lists. And I would bet, if I had my druthers, if you check the city of Plano's list from 10 or 15 years ago, this probably matches that list. Plano is known, everybody sort of stole their stuff. That's probably how it came about. It was common practice. And I think some of the trends in planning have been, to what degree did we over-regulate and create some issues? And I think really from our perspective, because, you know, some communities, so if you're in Arizona, for example, they probably have an approved plant list, and there's probably a valid reason for it, and those are really low water usage because they've got that issue. Even though water, again, as people think, it's not an unlimited resource, we have to pay for it, it's not so important to us that we feel the need to regulate plants going forward. I think it's also just as time has gone on over the decades, you get somebody who's gone to landscape architecture school who knows this stuff, and they're doing the design, and they frankly know better than us. A lot of times we're having to call the parks department and go, hey, can you tell us what this plan is? We don't even know. So that's kind of how it came about, and I bet where it came from.
Okay, thanks. And then my last question would be, what do we want to be, right? What do we want our neighborhoods to look like?
Right.
I think that's probably the biggest driver. You know, you could go in a neighborhood and you could have a couple people with live oaks, and then you have 5 or 6 people that have crepe myrtles in their front yard, and then you have some other trees planted there. It gives a lot of latitude, but is that really what we want?
Yeah, and I think what staff would say is, again, one of the trends more lately have been to have a diversity in terms of your landscape and your plant materials, that you don't all have those same kind of species. So, you know, oak wilt is something we worry about. We'll occasionally get notified that cases of oak wilt have been found in the area, and everybody goes into a bit of a panic. And so if we had all oaks going in, we had a batch of oak wilt come through, then they're all gone. So I think some of that deference to homeowners is useful. Again, as an example to me, I like having a couple pecan trees because when they mature, you get pecans off it. Again, as I mentioned, trees I've lost in my backyard, I lost a peach tree and I lost a really big grapefruit tree, and I've planted fruit trees again in the backyard because I like having, you know, fruit come off, and if we're going to have some people may not want to mess with that. You know, grapefruit and limes and lemons have thorns on them. You know, if you don't like grapefruit, you've got, you know, one year I think I was bringing in bags of grapefruit for staff because we were overwhelmed in it. You know, I think we just ran out of lemon juice that my wife juiced and froze in our back freezer. So I think that's kind of the idea that, you know, what we're okay with is showing deference to our residents to say, you know, in particular, you know, we've talked about this. The new median home value in Schertz, NSCUC, ISD is up around $300,000. Somebody's spending $300,000 on a house, then to some degree, I'll let you figure out what you want to plant. I think that was a lot of what went into it. Okay.
Any other feedback for Mr. James?
I like your draft 4, and that gives the homeowner the opportunity to upgrade if they choose to and work with the developer to get what they want. Because by telling the developer what he's going to do, you're stuck with it. And my next door neighbor's got a big damn tree that's tearing up his driveway because the roots won't go down any further, they're coming up.
Yeah, you'll get that. You'll get backyards where they want to put in a pool, and somebody goes, I don't want a tree in the backyard. I don't want the leaves dropping. I don't want the shade. You know, again, at some point, we don't need to kind of micromanage that.
Well, I think the consensus is that draft 4 seems to be the way to go.
So if I could, let me tell you what I did with commercial, though, because again, we got some feedback
Okay.
in planning. If you don't,
All right.
we're very proud of it. So what we did is, in trying, don't audibly laugh at me. So mean. What we had tried to do is provide flexibility on some of the drafts. We had some mandatory requirements and we had some optional requirements. And I think staff kind enough to go through and say, you know, I'm not sure this is going to work quite the way you think it's going to work because of either where they're duplicative or contradictory or things like that. And so we approached it again of going back and saying, rather than do that, let's go with the mandatory minimum, but let's make sure that we're not kind of overreaching with it. And so what we've got is, we've got a requirement for a 20-foot landscape buffer on commercial or multifamily adjacent to a right-of-way. That's fairly common to what we do now. So basically, unless you're on Main Street, you have that 20-foot landscape buffer across the front. Pretty common, pretty straightforward, rarely problematic from our perspective. And what we've gone is 1 tree per 30 linear feet. I think we increased it a little bit from 1 per 20, reduced number of trees to 1 per 30. We think the spacing makes a little more sense for that going forward. We've also added a provision that says staff can waive the requirement for the trees if that entire 20-foot buffer is encumbered by an easement that won't let you plant a tree. That's probably the biggest problem we have and is a big jam up. So again, Public Works comes in and goes, hey, that's great, but I want a 15-foot easement, but I don't want over the top of the CPS easement that's 10 feet. And so you get 25, 30 feet of easements across the front of the property. None of them we don't allow trees to be planted, and it creates a problem. There's not much the developer can do about it. So if you've got those easements, staff can say, you don't have to plant the trees. It gives us a little bit of ability to say, well, you can kind of fit one in here, you can fit one in here. And then we still have the trees that would be in the parking lot, and typically have a parking lot in the front, so it's not as though you're going to be at the street and you're not going to have any trees kind of in front of the building. You'll have some of those trees in the parking lot that's still required. So that's one change we did. We then came back and said, you got to have that minimum of 20% of the site landscaped. Generally, that's not problematic as well. If it is, they're typically kind of overbuilding the site. So again, pretty straightforward, not hugely problematic. On 3, or C, it's this ratio of trees on site. So it's 9 trees per acre. We've kept that. Again, it ensures, even though we've done the thing in the first section with the easement, you get trees on site. But we've made the part about industrial less confusing. We basically just came back in and said you have to have 6 trees per acre. It's a little more streamlined than 60% of the required trees are based on your building footprint or something like that. It's just a cut and dry sort of standard. I think it's fairly consistent, not that radically different from what we had. Then we moved to kind of the interior landscape section. So we kind of covered what you have to do across the front, what you have to do overall on the site. Now we're kind of the interior, and that's where you've got a landscape 10% of the parking areas. We define that. That's generally what it had been before. Going forward, same exception in there. We move to E, and this is the requirement for landscape islands. So the first one, basically, you got to have 10% landscape. Next one says you've got to have these landscape islands. We pulled back a bit on that, 1 per 20 feet. Occasionally we'll get this parking row that they're like, I got 13 spaces. Sorry, you got to have an island. In this case, we expanded it. Still have to have the 10% overall kicking around. And then we also modified the size of that to make it 9 by 18. And that's because if we reduce the size of our parking space, we don't have to come back to this section. I don't think anybody will really notice it. Typically what they do is they put a curb around that landscape island, and so if we got a really, really vigilant new planner come in one day on a commercial site, they may measure the grass from the grass and go, oh, you're short because you got 6 inches of curb. So it gives a little bit of flexibility for stuff. Most people won't notice, but it covers us in a couple of regards, we think, with regard to that. And then we move to the perimeter landscape area, and this we've combined some sections. It's fairly long, but basically we set a standard that where you're adjacent to residential zoned or used, pretty consistent, and where you're not, you're adjacent to something else. And so if you're adjacent to residential, what we've got is you've got to basically provide that 20-foot buffer. It's kind of consistent with what we have now. If you're not adjacent to res, you just have to have a 5-foot landscape strip, unless your building setback line is 0 and you can encroach into that, then you don't have to do anything. So again, we think we've done that. So if you're adjacent to res, we got that 20-foot buffer. We've got the trees that are planted, you know, in that area, 1 tree per 30 linear feet. But again, if you're adjacent to commercial, then we've increased the tree planting to 1 per 100. Again, we've still got that 9 per acre, but it gives more flexibility as to where they want to put them. And so again, if you're adjacent to commercial, I just want a 5-foot strip. If you're adjacent to res, I want the 20-foot. You've got the screening, you've got the trees. We have done away with the shrub row adjacent to vehicular use areas. This is one of the biggest complaints we got, particularly in industrial, is you've got a parking lot, a truck loading court for an industrial. They're right next to an industrial. And we go, yeah, you each have to plant a shrub row. And the guy's going, why? I can stand here and I can see what's over there. They can see it's the same thing here or there. We took that out. That's probably one of the biggest benefits. Now, that applies to commercial as well, but again, the idea is they can plant what they want. We've softened it up with the green space and the trees, and we've left it at that. And that's generally the gist of it.
What do you think, commissioners? Any feedback?
And again, if we implement it and we start looking up a couple years from now as stuff develops, we're going, oh, that doesn't look good. Well, is that an anomaly, or is that where we're kind of getting, do we need to tweak the code? We can come back at it.
Okay, so if I understood you correctly, you would rather we not take landscape piece and send it forward.
If
You'd
you're
rather keep it all together.
Let me say this, given the feedback from the commissioners, if you're comfortable with it, going, hey, we've talked this a few times, we've kind of had people weigh in, at some point move it forward. If folks aren't here, they're not here, I'll show deference to them.
Well, but you mentioned your work, staff's workload. Is it,
Yeah, it's not that hard. We can time when we run stuff. So again, it's easy enough to run this. It probably gives us a bit of victory. And so if you're comfortable, what we could do is approve the landscape as proposed and the UDC amendments. We'll kick those on, and then we'll talk parking space count and size and single-family residential modified standards next time. And that's not overly burdensome.
commissioners, what do we want to do?
Get off this subject.
So that's,
Is this a public hearing? This is a public.
yeah, so
Oh, it is, isn't it?
Should have a say.
I'm sorry, yeah,
Are you going to get to that?
we're going to get to that.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry
Yeah,
for
you're going to get to it. No, you're fine.
no, we needed the reminder,
Yeah.
okay?
We're being too generous.
All right. And I apologize for that. Yeah, we
That's okay.
should have let Mr. James talk. All right, public hearing's open. Come on up, name and address for the record, please.
Raymond Bruce Torgerson, 8795 Quellwood Run. I like the draft 4 that they've done. I was a little concerned the way that it was worded in the staff write-up and stuff, because they said there were 11 requirements, and now we're going to have the developer only do 9. Every developer could pick and choose. And they cited in theirs that specific site constraints due to easements and different stuff. Well, that means everybody can do that. So it looks like you've just kind of, obviously one elimination was the trees, but was there something else eliminated? Or what I guess I'm asking for, are there specific requirements for the developer, or is there an opportunities for that developer to come into get a waiver because of, what did you call it here? Specific site constraints. And so I just didn't want to, I guess I was concerned about just an open carte blanche that every developer could say, well, here's 11 requirements, I can get rid of any 2 I want. And that's kind of how I read that. And so I just wanted some clarification on it.
Okay,
Thank you.
now, I've got to ask, anyone else? No, she's with me.
I know she is, but
she's
she's
not
the
gonna
only
say
one to get up and talk. I recognize her.
All right, we'll close the public hearing at 6:54.
Okay, so to answer the question, we had started, as you remember with previous drafts, down this path of a little bit of flexibility through a pick and choose. And I think we've kind of moved away from that a little bit, in part because of where some of the requirements overlap or contradict one another, and also a bit of a philosophical shift of, and I think it's a fair point, we get into this infinite number of things that people say, I can't meet this, I can't meet that, mine's different, mine's special, whatever. And so what we kind of did is went back based on some of the feedback and went with, let me give you a bare bones kind of thing. This is that minimum threshold, it's what you have to do. The one provision we built in that we have struggled with quite a bit, and if Commissioner Breaux was here, he would talk about trees under power lines, is that issue of when the front landscape area is encumbered by easements. And the two solutions, or a couple options you have, is one is what we've done is said, if that 20-foot area is encumbered by easements, then staff has the ability to approve. We think that's a fairly straightforward thing. We think that if staff looks at it and says, well, you could fit some here and fit some here, most developers are going to say, okay, if I can do it, that's fine. The battle we have now is we have sites that those easements stretch 30 feet deep, 35 feet deep, and so that landscape area in the front has to extend way back just to get a tree to be planted. And one of the issues is if you're planting a tree that's going to be an oak or a pecan, something big, and you've literally planted it up against the back of a curb on one side where you have paving because you shoved it all the way over because you've already extended, then the tree's roots are primarily going to grow out into the easement. That's problematic because if we have a line break and it's a fairly deep line, we're coming to have and build a big trench and you're taking out the roots as it is. And so rather than say we're going to force you to do it and eat up 35 feet instead of 20, which is the intent, let's put that exception provision in there for it. And we think that makes more sense as a way to go with that exception. And again, we still have the 9 per acre. And then I think the other part of it is this philosophical of, look, we've gone through this thing, we've streamlined it, we've reduced the standards, we've come to what we feel is sort of our minimum standard, and our minimum standard is our minimum standard. And unless you've got some really, really unusual circumstance that you want to go to Board of Adjustment and request a waiver that you can validate, then you need to meet our minimum standard. So it's a little bit of a different approach, I think, kind of to address some of those things.
All right. So basically, to make sure we have an answer, you did away, because the previous draft, I said something like, here's 12 things, pick 9, and you've done away with all that.
We've done away with all that. We've kind of
designated the
merged it,
minimums.
and they're all mandatory now.
Okay.
But we've, as I said, we've done some things with saying, well, we don't need 1 tree per 20 feet. We'll go 1 per 30 linear feet. We've gone with, let's make sure our minimum standard is really minimum. If they want to do tighter spacing, great. But we think it's a little bit better, and we can kind of hold firm to it.
All right, I had it, and then I moved my thumb, and I lost it again. Basically, what I was looking to read was where the landscape buffer is encumbered by easements. The wording said that staff could allow the relocation of those trees.
That's right.
It didn't say they could do away with them.
Yeah.
So they could
Put them somewhere else. You've still
Right.
got the 9 per acre.
which is a little bit different than just waiving it
That's
altogether.
right.
Yeah. Anybody else? Okay, so, we have a couple choices here. One of the things we're going to have to do is, once again, postpone things to another meeting. But if the commission so desires, we could go ahead and send the landscape change to city council with our recommendation.
And if you're going to do that, I'd say if you're okay, send the SUP change as well that we've talked about, the specific use permit with the site plan,
Okay,
if you're okay.
yes, it did. Well, then, what Commissioner Ray what I really need is a motion then to recommend approval And how would we designate these?
I would do version 4 of the landscape ordinance change and the SUP requirement that allows for the site layout. And if you do that, we know the version you're talking about.
I make a motion that we recommend approval for the landscape and the SUP, draft 4 of the landscaping.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to recommend approval of landscape version 4 and the changes to the specific use permit requirements. Recommend approval to City Council. Any further discussion? Call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. 4 ayes, none opposed, that motion passes. All right, what we have to do now is dispose of the rest of them, and typically, again, what I need is a motion to postpone the remainder of these UDC changes to a future meeting. And whether or not you want to specify a meeting date, keeping in mind that unless things change, that rezoning request out in the Woman Hollern area is on the agenda for the 11th, for our next meeting. So you can either recommend a specific date, or we can just leave it to staff to put it back on the agenda.
What's the recommendation? What's the proposed?
Well, we need to postpone, so let's see, Brian, help me out here, or someone help me out here, of these.
Postpone to a January meeting, because
Well-
we've got a couple big cases, so we'll do it on the one where we don't have.
What I'm looking for here is, what we were working on tonight is Part 3, Section, Article 5, Article 9, and Article 10. So what did we, the landscape is what? I guess I can look here and see. Yes.
I make a motion that we postpone Article 10 to a future date.
I second.
Okay, let me catch up with you here, Ray. And allow, basically allow staff to choose that date, correct, Commissioner Ray? Okay. So I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. All righty. And again, sir, I apologize. I'm used to seeing more people out there at public hearings, and it completely escaped me that that's what we were doing, so.
It was probably Brian's fault for blocking your
Yeah,
view.
we'll just blame Brian. Okay. All right, so moving on, 7A is request by commissioners to place items on a future P&Z agenda. Anybody have anything? Item B, announcements by commissioners. Anybody have anything? And I don't know if staff is going to bring it up, but just keep in mind that our next meeting is January 11th, and will be over in the municipal court chambers next door. Okay? All right. Anybody else? All right, staff announcements. Did I steal your thunder?
Just one.
Okay.
We have a staff announcement here. It's a site plan for the Cibolo Valley Baptist Church subdivision. What it is I believe it's a 6,100 square foot pavilion that they're installing there. And they're moving, there's some existing structures that they're moving. If you can, this is where the pavilion is right here. They're gonna put some drainage in right here, and they're moving the structures over here to this side of the property, and they're gonna be planting some shrubs and stuff over here. So that's it.
All right, sir, thank you. And of course, item 8, in our meeting packets, there's a list of the current items that, and their status at City Council. And therefore, item 9, there being no further business for this commission, this meeting's adjourned.